past 7 years, I have been writing seriously, right? Past hobby writing to the point where I am trying to either be published or continue publication. In those years, I have written 5 books, which is just mind-blowing to me. I was trying to wrap my head around that earlier and it wasn't happening. But I've written 5 books, 2 of which have gotten published so far, which is really exciting. Of those 5 books, I've written so many drafts. And I finally feel like I have enough data to kind of look back over my 7-year journey and kind of see, you know, like how long on average it takes me to finish a first draft. How many months do I take between my first inkling of an idea and actually drafting? How much does my word count change between all of the drafts? I just wanted to do it all. So of course I made some stats because that's what I do. And I thought I would share my findings with you guys. I hope you find this interesting. I don't know if you will or not, but I certainly did. All of this data I've decided to compile is just going to be the first 3 drafts. These are what I usually work on my own before I send them off to anyone else for any kind of feedback. I can't control how long it takes someone to get back to me or read my book or whatever. So I'm just going to focus on the first 3 drafts, which are all me. I'm the only one seeing them and working on them. I also want to chat really quickly about my drafts, like what individually these 3 rounds of revisions kind of look like for me. So my first drafts are always very much so me telling myself the story. There are fragmented sentences. The story is written in more scene direction type situation than flowing narrative. I use a lot of placeholders. I even will skip some scenes sometimes and like, right, hey, flesh this out later. And in reality, what I consider a first draft, I think a lot of people would actually consider like an outline, a glorified outline, and I'm okay with that. Because of that, my first drafts are usually underwritten. Then I go into my second draft, which is where after I have read over the first draft and kind of figured out if anything needs reshaped, where I can add in more things like that. I actually go through and write out the whole thing, like make sure there's no placeholders anymore, make sure that all of the scenes are written out, things are connected. The connective tissue basically is there. It's still not in pretty writing, it's still not super like prosy, but at this point every single bone in the body is there and they're all connected in some way. Then my third draft is where I really finesse. I make it so that it is prepared and actually legible for someone to eventually read it and give feedback on. So this is where I write everything out in the prose that I want. I make my character's voice really pop and focus on individual words and languages and sentences that can like elect emotion more so. It's not fully a line edit, that's not what I'm doing here, but I am making sure that, I don't know, the vibes are there, the voice is there. The thing for me that makes a story really pop, which are those 2 things, voice and vibes, I make sure that happens so when someone reads it that they can get the full emotional experience along with the ride itself. We'll get started by going through each of the 5 projects and kind of like looking at them and their stats individually, and then we'll do like a big comparison of all of them. First we have When the Sea Came for Us, which is my YA dark mermaid fantasy that I was trying first to get an agent with, and it failed in the query trenches. I actually printed out a copy of it just for myself, just to have, because I love her so much. She taught me so much about writing the like, so there she is in all of her glory. She's a real book. And like I said, that book was a YA fantasy about a disabled girl who gets abducted by land-dwelling Marrows. It's a lot of Celtic mythology, and she is forced to fight in their like civil war that they've got going on. I started brainstorming this project in April of 2017, and I took about a week and a half to brainstorm. Like I just remember this being like a total haze, like just total fugue state. I just zoned in and did nothing else but think about this story. Then I immediately started drafting my first draft on May 7th, and it took me about 3 months and 2 weeks when I finished around the end of August there. My second draft I started in early September and then ended in May of the next year, and that took around 8 months. Now I will say I did draft 1 and 2 kind of like in tandem. I felt a lot. This was my first serious book, right? I did not know how to edit. I did not know how to plot, which we'll talk about later. And so my combined word count for that was 53,272 words. And then my third draft for this I started in January of 2018, and I finished in September of 2018 for a total of 9 months and 2 weeks for that draft. At that point the word count had jumped up to 115,681 words. Now let's talk about The Glass Witch. This was my debut novel. This is my middle grade spooky fantasy about a chubby little angry witch who has to join a Halloween themed pageant in order to rid her town of a vicious witch hunter. But my brainstorming for this project started on September 28th of 2018, and then I went right into draft 1 the following March of 2019, and that lasted until the end of May for a total of 2 months and 1 week. The first draft was completed at 20,942 words. Draft 2 I started in the beginning of June and I finished early September. That one took me 3 months to finish and my word count was 32,515. And then I nearly immediately dove into draft 3 mid-September and finished mid-October. 1 month, 35K, done, complete. Perfect angel baby child of God. The Glass Witch was the easiest book I've ever worked on. Probably will never have that experience again. Now let's talk about the odd book, or the odds. I'm gonna never not call the odds the odd book, or Tobe, which was its placeholder name. This is my second published novel, and this is about our little main character, Begonia, who, gosh, what is the pitch of this book? This is about a little girl who doesn't have her magic, and she has to save her 53 grandparents that she lives in a nursing home with from a witch who is doing mean things in their sentient haunted house, and just goes on an adventure to like find the thing that will give her her magic and save all of her grandparents. It's kooky, it's ridiculous, it's the most me book I've written. Anyway, my brainstorming for her started in August of 2019, and then I was unable to start the first draft until August 15th, 2020, and that lasted until March 30th, 2021. So for 7 months and 1 week, I drafted this bad boy, and the first draft ended up being 23,431 words. Draft 2 I started in October, ended in March for 5 months, 1 week, 46,956 words for that one. And then my final draft before it went off for readers, I started in April and ended at the end of June, and that was 2 months at 57,997 words. Next up, we have all of my work in progresses, and the first one up is Project Pyro. This is my YA thriller. It follows a teenage girl who's disabled and always kind of had trouble with the law, and then for some reason she's invited to this really prestigious school and has no idea why. And when she shows up, people start disappearing, and she thinks it might have something to do with her past. I started brainstorming this project on February 31st of 2021. Then I started the first draft on the 1st of June 2021 and finished it sometime in August of 2021, but it only took 2 months to write this project, and it ended up being 34,008 words. And then draft 2 I started in November of 2022, finished December 2023. So it took 1 year and 1 month to get through that draft, and that ended up being 51,673 words. And last but not least is Bitter Bones. This is my middle grade horror novel. This follows a boy with too many bones and a missing mom, and I don't know how much I've said about this book yet, but it's got bad parents and creepy dolls and lots of body horror. And this month it's been the absolute bane of my existence because it's been so difficult to write. That's for another video though. I started brainstorming this book in January of 2023, and then I started the first draft on the 17th of May 2023 and finished it September 31st 2023. That first draft took a total of 5 months and 1 week, and the final word count was 45,810 words. And now I'm going to pull you over to my computer and we're going to discuss the situation surrounding each book and look at some of the charts. First of all, let's look at the time between finishing my brainstorming and starting draft 1. I split this up in weeks because I just thought that would be the easiest way. So when this came for us, a week and a half. Like, I was just in. I was so excited to write my first book, to really try to be published. I was just like rushing through. The Glass Witch was about 5 months. At the time I was working on this, I was still trying to query When the Sea Came for Us and get an agent through that. So a lot of my focus was on that story, while this was just something I was kind of like, you know, piddling with in the background. The odds was a whole year. I got the idea for this, and in fact I never thought it would be an actual book. It was just something that I was just like brain farting out that was like, wouldn't it be funny if? My idea was that if I was able to write this really great book that I had in mind, which was The Glass Witch, that I could also kind of like have an idea in the background for what I would write next if I could get a 2-book deal. That worked out perfectly. But then I didn't have very much time to actually get in and do it because I did sell The Glass Witch, and then I did have to do revisions on it with my editor, so lots of time in between. Project Pyro was a little bit different. Only 2 months between the brainstorming and the writing of it, and that is because I was supposed to be writing a different book for NaNoWriMo that year, and then I just got possessed by Satan one night and got this idea for a YA thriller, and I was like, I have to plan this and write this for Nano. The whole other thing is out the window. I'm doing this. So I had like 2 months to plan until it was time to go. And then Bitter Bones was about 4 months. I remember getting the idea for this the summer before I started brainstorming it. I remember it vividly. I was sitting in the bathtub and I was thinking of all these ideas. I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a story. But I was so busy with revision for the odds. Like I just did not have time to brainstorm at all. So I just wrote my idea down and shoved it away, filed it away for later. And then in January of the following year, I actually had time to sit down and start making the story something that could conceptually be a next book for me. So it took a little time, but that's how it works. Mind you, what I'm considering time between brainstorming and starting of draft one, I'm not considering like the very start, the very spark of the idea. I'm talking about when I have already had that spark and I am now giving it structure, giving the character life, like I am taking it and expanding it. For me, when I actually start this expansion process, that is when the project then becomes a work in progress versus just like an idea that I write down on a note card and shove it away. Now let's talk about how many months in total it takes to complete my first drafts. I think that most people would consider what I call my first draft a draft zero, or really just an outline, because it is very fragmented. It is placeholdery, it's underwritten, it's not even in complete sentences a lot of the time. It's just me telling myself the idea of a story to kind of get the flow going so I can picture what this will look like or what I could make it look like in the future. When the sea came for us, 3 months, I was so excited. I was just like, I had this fire under my butt and I was like, I want to be an author, I want to be a writer so bad, and I just like banged out this 53,000 word book. Then we have The Glass Witch, my precious angel baby, child of God, the easiest book I've ever written, and she was great. 2 months for that first draft. Granted, I think the first draft was like 20,000 words, but she was wonderful. She just flowed. I live chasing that high of how I felt writing The Glass Witch. And then we have The Redheaded Stepchild, which is the odd book, which took 7 months to complete. This is for many reasons. I was deep within the revisions for The Glass Witch. And if you have read The Glass Witch and then read the odds, you'll know like they are so structurally different. It was just a much more difficult book to write. I also remember really struggling with switching from first person with The Glass Witch to second person and third person with the odds. At the time while writing, I feel like I felt so distant from the characters, and truly in the first draft, I mean, there's not a lot of character work happening. It's just like scene placements, like the character is here doing this thing, move on. There's no true like feelings or emotions yet this early. And then it being third person, I just felt so distant and I was like, I don't think I'm having fun. I also think it's too weird. Like, why am I even writing this? I don't feel like that my publisher is gonna be like, what is this mess? Like, this is what's following up The Glass Witch. There was just a lot of reasons I was struggling. I also was putting a lot of who I was at the time and what I was exploring with like disability and chronic illness and things like that into the book, which made it difficult to write. I think that all is like perfectly displayed in this chart. Project Pyro took 2 months to complete. I was back on my productivity horse and I just like bashed this one out. I did write the first drafts of the odd book and Project Pyro like back to back. I think there was just like a couple weeks in between the two, and I knew that I was waiting on the next round of revisions for The Glass Witch and that I needed to revise up the odds because that was going to be next. The publisher did finally say, they were like, okay, we'll buy it. Of course they hadn't read it yet. So I still had that nervousness of like, oh my gosh, they said that they wanted this, but like they haven't read it. They just like knew generally what the idea was. So I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna touch that for a minute. I'm just gonna go write this other really fun thing. But I only had a little bit of time, so I had to like pump that one out. And then Bitter Bones, 5 months. That one took longer, but that was, again, I was working on other projects in between. Moral of the story is when I can just work on one project, like When the Sea Came for Us, The Glass Witch, and Project Pyro, I get my first drafts done really quickly. When I have to be working on other edits, it takes longer, which makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the amount of time between drafts 1 and 2. So When the Sea Came for Us, I took half a month. I took 2 weeks and I just dove right in. I was just so excited, you guys. Like I'll never forget the high of like writing my first book and like can't wait to like query it and like sell it in a 7-figure deal. And The Glass Witch was much the same. I mean, it was even less time. I took a week off between drafts 1 and 2. The odds, there was 7 months between the first draft and the second draft. Again, because of that work schedule, I had to be working on The Glass Witch at the time, and I wanted to do that, take that 2 months to work on Project Pyro as well. Project Pyro was 24 months. I I just can't get over that there was 2 years between when I wrote the first draft and started the second draft. Project Pyro has always had to be like my back burner project because she's not contracted. It's not a middle grade, so I can't really sell it as an option with how that works with my contract and stuff. It's just kind of a book that I want to sell in the future one day because I really I like it. I think it's really good. And Bitter Bones with 2 was quite the same, or I had a first draft for a long time before I came back and did the second one. So you can see with how I just the steep uphill climb, you can see very clearly what projects were sole projects and which ones I was working on other things at the time. Now let's talk about how many months it took me to complete that second draft. When the Sea Came For Us was 8 months. I'm gonna put this up to the fact that, number one, I had not figured out my revision style yet. It's your first book. You don't know what works well for you until you've done it a couple times. But I was truly trying with this book I was trying to do everything all at once. Like I was trying to make the prose pop and I was trying to make character development and work on the plot all at once, and it just took forever. On top of the fact that I had no idea how to structure a book yet. I remember with this book it took like I don't even know, like 4 or 5 drafts for it to click in my head that my main character is inactive and the story is not working because she is inactive. Like it was a structural outlining issue. Like it was a foundational issue, right? And I kept working and working and revising and taking all of these months, and it was not getting better even though I was putting in so much work. I didn't know what I was doing yet, but everyone needs that first book where it's like a learning book, you know what I mean? The Glass Witch Baby Girl took 3 months to complete that second draft, and it was just perfect. I came like born out of a migraine. Like Zeus birthing Athena. Like that is the Glass Witch for me. She was perfect angel baby child of God. The Odds took 5 months to complete. Oh, and then yeah, Project Pyro took 13 months to complete. That's because I think I did it in like 2 parts. Like I got through the first act and then I had to go back to revisions on my contracted work, and then it sat there all spring, summer, and almost all of fall, and I didn't start working on it again until November. So I wasn't writing it 13 months, but its entire progress spanned 13 months. And obviously we have no Bitter Bones for this because I'm working on the second draft right now. Moving on to draft 3. This is where we've got the bones, we've got the connective tissues. Now we're doing the details. We're doing voice and we're making the characters pop. Oh, when the Sea Came For Us, again, 9 months. I just had no idea what I was doing and I was revising in circles. The Glass Witch, 1 month. She was good to go. Also, I would like to point out that the Glass Witch is a very simple, like A to B plot. Like there's not a lot of like complexity there with what was happening in her plot line. That made it easier to revise versus The Odds, which was a little bit more complex. I always compare the two. But the third draft of The Odds took 2 months. And at that point I was on deadline, so I was working on no other projects. So you can see The Odds actually doesn't take a super long time to revise when it's my sole project. So what can I take from all of these stats? Number one, I have not found a great way to be able to work on multiple projects and consistently work on both of them at the same time. I say I will, but then it just like becomes one project takes up most of the time and the other one falls to the wayside. I've tried multiple things. I've tried the certain project in the morning, a certain project in the night. I just still haven't figured it out yet. We're all a work in progress though, aren't we? Second, I learned that finding my revision style and finding what worked for me made all of the difference. I always recommend writers read as many craft books as they can get their hands on because it doesn't hurt. You don't have to follow them to a T, but the things that you absorb through like osmosis basically are so helpful for finding what works for you in revision. Third, if left to my own devices, I will immediately start a second draft after the first, but usually I can't do that because I have other contractual obligations. For me, my first drafts are so bare bones that it doesn't hurt at all for me to dive into another draft because I don't even really need time away from it yet because it's just so incomplete at that point that I actually think it does more harm having a gap between my first and second drafts than not. I think a gap between my second and third is better because then at least I have everything there that needs to be there and nothing gets forgotten or left out. On average, it takes me 3.8 months exactly to write a book. I think my second drafts are the most time intensive because I'm really making sure I have everything in the book that needs to be there. Again, it doesn't have to be written well, but it needs to be there and it needs to be, for my brain, in the order in which it's going to appear in the novel. So say if I know I'm starting out a chapter with an anecdote, I gotta have the anecdote in the beginning, and then I'm gonna go to a dialogue, and then I'm gonna go to a description scene, and then in the middle description scene I'm gonna have some internal monologue about the character arc or something, and then we go straight into dialogue. love. And then like, it's like I have to know the flow of each chapter too, which is why I think this draft is the one that takes the longest out of all of the others. This was really fun to go through and kind of see. I have never yet compared all of my drafts and books together like this. Seeing them lined up, it really is insightful and also really hits home that like, wow, I've actually written 5 books. Like that's insane. Anyways, I hope you found this interesting. Tell me about your first drafts or your time between drafts. Like what is your average for your first drafts? Like how long does it normally take you? Everyone is so different. Like I think it's just so fascinating how different people can write books in such different ways and they all can still lead to great stories. Both The Glass Witch and The Odds are available for order. Links are below. It'd be great if you checked them out. But thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.